Hi, everybody. Welcome to the RentPrep.com November 2023 Ask Me Anything session. I'm Andrew Schultz, community manager here at RentPrep. I'm also a licensed real estate broker with over 14 years of experience. Actually, it's 15 years of experience now with the property management and rental property industries, which is a long time as I sit here and think about that. And I have with me today Josh from the RentPrep marketing team. Josh, how are you doing today?
Oh, Andrew, I'm good. My voice is a little bit raspy today. I was yelling at the Bills game last night.
Don't even get me
Yeah,
started,
tough
man.
day, tough Monday in Buffalo for all us Bills fans, but we're gonna still get through it.
That
We're
game,
overcoming a lot of stuff here.
that game was robbed. We were robbed of that game on a multitude of different levels.
Yeah,
I swear the refs must have had a money line bet on the Eagles during that game. Like, you
I'll
can't
tell
tell
you
me that
what.
wasn't a horse collar. Like,
I know,
it
I
was
know.
crazy. It was
It was
crazy.
crazy, but we're resilient here at RentPrep. We're battling back. You weren't feeling too well last week, which is why we rescheduled, which is no
Yeah.
big deal. But as we start to, and the Bills yesterday, and as we start to
Mhm.
get into the snowy season here in Buffalo, that's when we get tough, right?
Yeah. Well, so the theory goes, right? So yeah, I was in last Monday in the morning and ended up having to leave midday. Wasn't feeling real good and decided that it probably wouldn't be a great idea to try to be on a Facebook Live session for a full hour. Thankfully, we were able to
Yeah.
reschedule for this week, which is awesome. So
Yeah.
we are just past Thanksgiving. How was your Thanksgiving?
Thanksgiving was good. We did my girlfriend and I went to both our families on the same day, so it was a whole 8 hour day of family fun. But
Hmm.
it was nice. It was a good weekend. Nice to have a couple days off here, as I still did some last minute preparation around the house for the winter. As I said, it looks like the next couple days here we're starting to get some light snow in Buffalo, but obviously, snow will be here soon, and had to get the snowblower ready and all that kind of stuff. So,
Oh yeah, it'll be here before you know it. It's actually I just got my snowblower back this morning. My I don't know if I ever mentioned to you, my brother-in-law and sister own a tractor dealership. So they do like all
which
of our
one?
service.
Where at?
Can I say?
Uh, no, it's all right.
Yeah.
You don't need to
It's
say.
it's in Alexander, New York, and if you can figure that out, you can pretty much figure it out from there. Is really what it boils down to. But anyway, they just dropped our snowblower back off this morning for our house.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, I just signed the last snowplow contract this morning for our managed properties too. Like, we've been going through and trying to get our vendors lined up for snow removal and stuff like that. And this year has been really, really tough to find snowplow contractors that are,
Hmm.
not outrageously priced. And we have some historic data from years past on a lot of the properties that we've managed, but like, we're seeing in some instances plow rates double what we were seeing last year. And I think it's
Wow.
honestly because of those two major snowstorms that we
That
had.
that's what I was
The
gonna
one
ask.
Thanksgiving
Was it
weekend, and then the one was like Christmas
exactly?
weekend, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it was Christmas. It was both the holidays, and
Yeah.
then throughout the rest of the winter, there
It
wasn't
was
even that much
pretty
snow.
mild. Yeah. It
Yeah, it was
wasn't
a mild
terrible.
winter in Buffalo, and then yeah, you had those two major storms, which for sure I could believe that those would be scaring people enough to
Hmm.
where they would try to get somebody under contract.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and even the contracts that we're seeing this year, like last year's contracts didn't have blizzard clauses in them. Like, this year, we're seeing contracts come across that if there's more than 2 foot of snow that drops in any one event, at our option, we can bring in heavy equipment and charge you, at $125 or $250 an hour, depending on
Oh,
what we need to do.
I didn't
And
know that.
oh yeah, it's crazy. Like, it's all written so that like they have to get your okay first. But like, what are you gonna do? Like, if you we're different because it's all residential, but like, if you have an office building and there's 2 foot of snow in your parking lot, you're paying the money regardless because you want to be open for business. So
Yeah,
it's kind of a catch 22 that way. I'm hoping we don't
for
wind up
sure.
with any major events like that, but it's Buffalo. We're good for a couple of decent sized snow events a year, no doubt.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of time, really.
Yeah, yeah, I know. And I don't know. Steve had sent a photo. He had a picture of the storm from last year and him trying to
Mhm.
get into the office building after last year's storm, and none of our plow guys hadn't come or anything. So
Right.
it was a funny photo. The snow was pretty
Mhm.
high up, and he was trying to dig his way through. But yeah, man, for sure, I could see with winter coming, I could for sure see people, especially with the storms, just for recency bias too.
Mhm.
Just getting scared and just try to protect themselves. But that storm clause, that's kind of interesting. I've never really heard of people putting storm clauses in or being able to
Yeah.
charge more, which I
Well, and
get it.
I
It
went
makes
back and
sense.
looked because it wasn't something that I remember seeing in any of our contracts in previous years. And it's
Yeah.
definitely something that appears to be new in this year's contracts with a lot of different vendors. We're using 3 different vendors for snowplow services this year.
I was gonna ask you, just due to the location, the different
Yeah.
locations of the properties, you just can't use the same vendor.
Yeah, so we're spread across Erie and Niagara County, so we have a pretty big geographic footprint that we cover. So there's no one vendor that's going to be able to cover all of that. The other thing is we have 2 vendors that are covering kind of the same area in the city of Buffalo. But my thought process is if something happens and one of the vendors is unable to perform, at least we have somebody else that's already in the area. Doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to want to take us on for the rest of the season, or they're going to give us great pricing if we want to add mid-season. But at least we've already been through the process of finding and onboarding and vetting and everything else, so that if we do need to call somebody and say, I'm in a bind, can you help me by plowing this property? At least we already
Yeah,
have all their paperwork and stuff on file. So
yeah.
that's kind of what we're hoping for.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Always good.
Just dumped
Always
water
good to
all
have
over
a backup,
myself.
right? Have some quick info and stuff. All right.
Right.
Well, what else? Before we hop in here really quick, what
Sure.
else? What other tips do you have just as far as getting ready for just kind of getting ready for the winter time or colder weather? I know not all of our listeners are in Buffalo or the East
Mhm.
Coast or anything like that, but what are a couple quick tips just for getting your property ready for the winter?
Some of the things that we try to make sure that we do is like, especially on our larger multifamilies, we always make sure that every entrance has a shovel and a bucket of rock salt. We're
Hmm.
obviously out providing the service anyway, but at least if it's there, if somebody sees an obvious trip hazard like ice, I'm hoping that
Hmm.
they will at least throw some rock salt down. That goes a long way. Making sure that you have checked your vents, any sort of exterior vent that needs to be closed up before winter hits, or any sort of exterior gap where you can get any sort of cold air draft through. And really, it's not even just cold air draft. Like vermin, it's amazing how small the hole a mouse can fit through is when you really
Hmm.
stop and think about it. And if you have even the slightest little gap anywhere around the outside of your property, they're looking for someplace warm to go. So
Oh yeah.
if I had to say, like my top tips would be make sure you've got your shovels and rock salt and everything. Make sure you have a snow brush in your car. And
Yeah.
after that, I would say double check all the way around your building. Make sure that you have your building foundation completely sealed up, around doors are sealed up, things like that. And
Mm,
the one thing that most people don't think to check is their dryer vents.
mm,
Make sure that your dryer vent has the little plastic louvers on it that are closing the way they're supposed to, because that's a
right.
very easy way for either cold air or a rodent to find its way into your house.
Yeah, and they can for sure climb. I know that
Yeah.
from experience. I've watched them scale
Hmm.
brick walls, the sides of brick walls, come on up. I've watched them in some of my early on apartments. I've watched them crawl up and hang off the window overhang and biting my tongue so that I didn't freak anybody out by telling them that there was a mouse up there. But they can for sure climb too. And I've had a few properties that I was living in that we had issues with, especially during the winter time, because they're obviously looking for a spot to hide out and stay warm.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's as soon as it gets cold, you can almost guarantee that we're going to generate a couple of mouse calls or something. And we already have. Like as soon as the weather started shifting, we
Hmm.
had a couple of tenants that reached out and said, "Hey, saw a mouse in the basement when I was doing laundry, stuff like that. So it happens every year.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's part of it though.
Hmm.
But all right, let's jump into some questions. I know we're already
Sure.
10 minutes in here, so
That's all right.
let's rip it up. All
We had a
right.
lot of good questions this month too.
I know we had another month of a ton of submissions, and also we still have some Facebook questions that we need to get to from last time. So
Hmm.
so let's start this up. All right. Question from Antoinette. What can landlords do to prevent charges with discrimination from the Fair Housing Institute?
Follow fair housing law. It's that simple.
Yeah.
And this is a question that I wanted to bring up. And actually, somebody in the Facebook group had mentioned, I had commented on one of the posts. Somebody was doing something that was pretty obviously a fair housing violation, and somebody had asked me, hey, why don't you talk about fair housing in one of your podcast episodes? And I apologize, I can't remember who it was, but I'm not licensed or certified or whatever to train people in fair housing, which is why I tend to refer people to fair housing law or to a different website or whatever. And I don't actually get into a lot of the fair housing issues. Like I just finished my 22 and a half hours of continuing ed for my broker's license, and we have to take fair housing as part of that. And now we have fair housing, we have cultural bias, there was something else that's mixed in there too, and I can't remember what. So actually, most real estate agents and real estate brokers get a fair amount of fair housing training and cultural bias and cultural diversity training and things like that. And it's important because we are dealing with the general public on a day-to-day basis. As
Mhm.
far as what the average landlord or anybody else can do to pick up some education on fair housing, there are a ton of websites out there that offer fair housing education. Some of them free, some of them charge a small sum, but it's worth it. Like if you don't understand the fair housing laws, it's something that's pretty critical for you to understand as a landlord. And I applaud any landlord that actually takes the time to do the research and understand what their legal obligations are under fair housing law, because there's very, very few instances where you're not liable under fair housing law. And
Right.
it's one of those situations where you're better off knowing what you need to know ahead of time so that you are prepared. Like we always talk about having a fair housing compliant set of screening criteria. Every single time, if you screen somebody using the same set of criteria every single time, and that criteria is fair housing compliant, you're never going to be in a situation where you're discriminating on someone based on a fair housing issue. So
Mhm.
that's where I'm at on it. If you are interested in fair housing, if you're interested in learning more about fair housing, you could check out Fair Housing Institute, which is actually the group that was mentioned here in the question asked by Antoinette. Or just go on Google and do a search for fair housing training. There are a ton of places that'll do it. I guarantee you that if you talk to like one of the Section 8 agencies in your neighborhood or something like that, Department of Social Services, any of those agencies can point you towards fair housing training. And I think it's a great idea for any landlord to go through it.
Yeah, and I think that's great. And I know we have, and I've been part of it. We have a relationship with Rocket Lawyer just as far as providing any additional just legal counsel or legal answers for any sort of landlord questions.
Mm-hmm.
And they've always been a good partner of ours, just as far as just giving you the correct information based on your state, your jurisdiction, all that kind of stuff. So,
Mm-hmm.
we refer to Rocket Lawyer a lot, but yeah, I mean, it's not something to any of these types of questions. Not something to really mess around with
Right.
or guess with, because it'll come back to bite you.
Well, and you mentioned we tend to think about fair housing law as a national level thing, but there are also state and local level laws that you need to be aware of as well. So, for
Yeah.
instance, in Erie County, excuse me, not in Buffalo, Erie County had a source of income legislation about 2 years before. I don't know if it's state or federal. Federally, there was an income protection, or maybe it was state. I got to look back into that. I think it's New York State protects source of income. I think that's a state level protection now. I think that was passed as part of HSTPA in 2019. But prior to that, Erie County had a local source of income protection law. So you really have to know the laws all the way across the board, local, state, and federal, to ensure that you're being compliant.
Right. Good. All right, let's bounce over to a Facebook question from Clarissa. I would like to start taking rent payment digital, no more handwritten checks. For accepting automatic direct deposit, do I need to give tenant a certain form or what? How does that work? Thank you.
So if you're trying to do it with your bank directly, you would have to talk to your bank to find out what
Yeah.
their, like, how they operate. I've never done it that way, so I don't really have advice on doing like a direct draft from your bank to their bank. We use property management software, Appfolio, that handles all of our digital payments for us, whether it be an online payment with a routing and account number. You can use a debit card, you can use a credit card. They also handle our payments through Pay Near Me, which is where our tenants can go and make their payments at CVS, 7-Eleven, Walgreens, and Walmart, which is super nice.
Mhm.
But they handle all that on our behalf. So like they take care of the processing fees and the physical movement of the money and stuff like that. Depending on how many doors you have, that's probably the route to go. It's going to be faster and easier to find a management software that's capable of handling that rather than trying to do something with your bank, because your bank is probably going to come with a lot of extra charges and things of that nature. It's probably going to be way more complicated than you need it to be. I would go with a management software wherever possible for something like payments. And it just makes the entire process a lot easier. And honestly, once you're using an online software for your payments, it makes it a lot easier for you to track every aspect of your rental, maintenance, accounting in general, your income and expenses, the whole shot. So I don't know as though I would necessarily recommend any one software. I certainly would not recommend the software that we're using for any smaller landlords. Um, but there are a ton of different softwares out there to choose from. It's just one of those topics that we're never going to be able to really devote the time necessary to
Right.
researching all of the companies, because there's so many of them, and you really need to get in depth with a company to understand if you want to use their software or not.
Right. Each one has a niche that they excel at, and
Yeah.
I'll speak candidly here. Obviously, RentPrep, our sister company, Stessa, they, they are a more financial tracking based property management. They're not a full solution of property management software, but they, we're very close to finishing that up. But they excel at getting you, helping you itemize your transactions, helping you getting your stuff ready for tax time,
Hmm.
all that kind of stuff. There is rent payment available on there. Um, but yeah, you really just need to find the application or the provider that's going to fit your needs. Some of them won't have one thing, maybe they don't have lists or syndicated listings, but they have
Hmm.
something else, and you just really need to find what's going to be the answer for you.
One There's no such thing as a perfect property management software. I think the one thing that's critical to look into when you are looking at management software is, especially if you have intent on scaling up and growing your operation, you want a rental management software, a property management software that has an open API integration so that it can talk to other software packages and vice versa. So like, for instance, we use Z Inspector for our move-ins and move-outs and periodic inspections and maintenance jobs and everything. If there's a photo, it's in Z Inspector. And Z Inspector automatically links to Appfolio. So when we complete an inspection on a unit, it automatically moves that data into Appfolio for us so that we don't have to do it manually. And it does that because there's an API. Appfolio
Mhm.
does not have an open API, which is one of the reasons that we're considering changing softwares. But they do have some integrations now, which is new in the last 6 months. They didn't used to have all of these integrations that they have now. They're starting to open up a little bit, but honestly, they're not there yet. But that's
Yeah.
the one thing I would say is, if you plan on expanding your portfolio, the most important thing to understand is if your property management software allows for open API access, because that's going to be critical to you growing your tech stack and growing your business as time goes on.
Right. Yeah, and you need to understand the options. If you're somebody with, one to four or 1 to 5 properties, but you still want to use, a software to manage, like there are free options out there. Stessa does have a free version of their product. You just got to do the research.
Well, and
That's
you
what it
said
comes down to.
they offer rent payments now, yeah?
Yeah, so there's rent payments in there. There's e-signing.
Mhm.
There's the financial tracking software is it built into there, which is really nice, especially with tax season coming up.
Yeah.
Um, that's really nice, and yeah, you really just gotta go out and do your research and figure out what's the best for you. And if you're planning on expanding, yeah, take that time to really look into what solution might be best.
Yeah, for sure. And that's one of the things that has been mentioned to me in the past is, can you do a video on property management softwares? And unfortunately, the answer is no. The
Yeah.
problem is to sit and learn all of these different management softwares. It's so time consuming, and I can't move my business data from this place to this place to this place to this place and have 7 different management softwares that I'm trying to reconcile at the end of the year when it comes time to do 1099s for our property owners. So like
Right.
I'm not the person who's going to be in a position to be able to do that, unfortunately. But I didn't
Yeah.
realize that Stessa had rent payments now. That's actually a pretty big move on their part. Makes them a
Yeah.
lot a lot more viable as an option, I would say.
Yeah, we've had it for a few months. But yeah, it's nice. It's another feature that landlords are and property managers are just looking for. So that's,
Hmm.
it definitely helps.
Yeah,
All right.
absolutely.
Okay. Let's do this one. Another Facebook question here while I'm down here. All right, question from Montez. I rent my garage apartment. Renewal date end of month. I have noticed my tenant is home much of the time. I've noticed my tenant is home much of the time. Do I have the right to ask if she has a job?
That's
So
weird. I don't
garage
have that
apartment's being
information in those either.
rented. Seems like the tenant is around all day.
Yeah.
Does Montez have the right to ask if they actually have a job? Does it matter though if they ran like the income verification or did their due diligence and checking to
Mhm.
make sure they have enough, funds to pay?
I mean, we don't like there are some landlords who will require tenants to recertify every time they lease the apartment. So every year they have to submit an application and update their income documents and fresh credit and background checks and stuff like that. We don't do that because honestly, I don't know as though it would really do anything other than waste a lot of our time.
Mm,
As long as the tenant's continuing to pay rent, like maybe they have a job where they're working from home, maybe they are split shift or something where they, work a couple days from home, couple days from the office. Can you ask? I mean, I
I don't
don't
know if
think
I
there's
would.
anything
I don't know
legally
if I
stopping you from asking, but I don't know if I would ask.
I don't know if
Like,
you need to open up the can of worms, like you said. Like if rent payments keep pulling in on time and there's been no other issues with the tenant, doesn't really matter
yeah.
how long they're at the property if they're paying the rent.
Yeah, and I would tend to agree. Like, as long as the rent's getting paid, I mean, there are so many different ways to make money from home at this point.
Yeah.
Whether it be, a job that used to be an office job that's now an at-home job, or being a content creator, being a streamer, like there are a
Hmm.
billion different ways to make money online at this point. Drop shipping, eBay type stuff.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wouldn't
I
I
mean,
wouldn't
since
necessarily be concerned that somebody's home more. Like it's just what it is. They may even have a seasonal job. Like we don't really have a ton of information here. They may have a seasonal job where they're working 60 to 80 hours a week during the summer, but during the winter they're either laid off or they only
right.
work 20 hours a week or something like that. It could just be something. I probably
Yeah.
wouldn't ask the question, to be honest with you. I don't feel like that's something. I think you're just inviting for more headaches. As long as your rent's getting paid, I would probably leave that one alone.
Right. Yeah, I think also the assumption, I know there's been a big push to get people back to work, but ever since the pandemic, um, I mean that just opened up every avenue to be able to do majority of jobs or office jobs remotely. So
Yeah, I
you're
mean,
really just opening up, you know,
I know that
like you
everybody at
said.
RentPrep went remote for a period of time. I think you guys are all back in the office at this point, right?
Yeah, yep, we're all back.
Mhm.
We missed each other, so we're all back here, but Yeah, I mean, and there's nothing, nothing wrong with it. You can still work efficiently from home. You can still make your money that way, and
Yeah.
you're going to pay your rent. Like, not really
And
something to.
there are people that are more efficient when they're working from home because they're not constantly distracted. They're not walking to the bathroom 17 times a day and stopping to talk to
Yeah,
somebody and going to the water cooler and everything else. Like,
right.
and like the flip side to that is, yeah, you might have an employee that, okay, my buzzer just went off on the dryer. I'm going to go swap my load of laundry. But if they're not running to the bathroom 17 times a day to go to the water cooler, who cares?
Yeah.
Like,
Hmm.
yeah, I don't know. We've basically been set up in such a capacity that like we can work from wherever we need to work from. And I've been that way since the beginning. Like all of our stuff is set up cloud based, and even our phone system is voice over IP. I can log into it from my cell phone wherever I'm at. So it makes it a lot easier for us to be able to operate. Even going back and talking about like the severe weather conditions, like if we get a blizzard, I'm not driving to my office. I only live like 5 minutes from my office, but it's not worth the drive when I can work from home and run the exact same operation from home that I do from here. So
Yeah,
it's
I mean, we switched all the way from we switched to just laptops and plugging in our HDMI's. We have no
yeah,
longer have any hardware, no hardware, so that you bring your laptop home every single night, and if there's a
yep.
snowstorm, you still have the ability to hook up, and you don't lose anything, and you have all your information. But um,
That's how we're
it's
set up here. Like I basically have, I'm looking at my actual desk, which has my laptop and then two monitors above. And I have the
mhm,
duplicate set up at home on my desk there as well. And I have a Microsoft Surface, so I bought the Surface dock and I just go from place to place, and it works really well.
mhm. Yeah, no, that's what it is. But
Mhm.
yeah, I think that's a long answer to a question there for you, Montez. But I hope we helped. All right, let's jump up to a form submission question from Stacy. Stacy asks, "What is your thought on managing your own rental that is out of the area? Is it truly necessary to have a property management company?" Not sure if my other question was received, but
It
here it
was.
is.
Why don't you jump right down to it? Because I moved them right next to each other in the document. So you can just read
Okay.
the second one.
Okay. What is the actual responsibility of a property manager? I am having challenges with mine, stating that overseeing slash managing a contractor is not their responsibility.
Okay.
So we got two parts here. What's your
Hmm.
thought of managing your own rental property if it's out of the area? Is that truly necessary? And then, obviously, what are the actual responsibilities of a property manager?
Hmm.
They're saying that their property manager, it seems like they actually are using one, is stating
Hmm.
that it's not their job to monitor, just contractors that have to come in to make fixes.
Well, it probably depends. Actually, all of it depends on what your contract with your property management company says, because I've seen contracts that are really, really good, and I've seen contracts that are absolute garbage and everything in between. So, really, it boils down to what did you agree to with your property manager and what does your contract say? If they're not doing what's in the contract, then yeah, I would say you should have an issue with them. If you're expecting them to do something that's specifically not in the contract or is called out in the contract as something that they specifically don't handle, then okay, that sounds like the property manager is probably in the right at that point. Um, so let's back up and say, what are your thoughts on managing a property out of the area? I think that it really depends on how far out of the area you are and what your availability is at the drop of a hat. And the reason I say that is because property management's a 24/7 business. It doesn't matter if you have one door or 100 doors or 1,000 doors. It's a 24/7 business. It doesn't necessarily feel like it when you only have a few doors because you probably aren't getting phone calls in the middle of the night all the time and stuff like that. But that doesn't change the fact that it is still a 24-hour business. And if a tenant's hot water tank blows up at 1 o'clock in the morning, you're going to get that phone call if you're not using a property manager. So if you're several hours away from the property, obviously it's going to be a little bit more challenging for you to physically appear and change the hot water tank out yourself. Now you're going to be relying on coordinating contractors from outside the area and things of that nature. Okay, if you have been in the area, lived in the area, and know some contractors, you might be okay. But if you bought this property sight unseen from, another state, you're probably are going to be in a situation where you don't have the pool of people built up that you would need to in order to manage a property remotely. So there's a lot that goes into whether or not it makes sense to manage a rental property remotely. And I don't think that there is a yes, you should do it or no, you shouldn't do it. I think it's going to be individual for every person. And I think it's going to depend on a multitude of factors, their comfort level in managing the property, where they live in relation to the property, is there licensing required, blah, 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 blah. There's a lot that would feed into that question. So is it truly necessary to have property management? The answer to that question is no. I know a lot of landlords that have a ton of doors and don't have a manager. We used to work with a gentleman and do a lot of leasing for him, and he self-managed about 180-ish doors himself, him and his wife. And he did most of the maintenance work himself. She did a lot of the book work, and they had like one, I think, full-time maintenance guy that helped out, but they didn't have a manager, and they had about 180 doors, but they lived, breathed, and worked their properties every day, Monday through Sunday, and then some. There was never a day off for him.
Yeah.
Like he's somebody that he's getting closer to retirement now. Wouldn't surprise me if he winds up hiring a manager at some point. But he literally lived, breathed, ate, slept his properties while he was operating them. So what is your level of commitment, really? Is I think a big question there. As far as what the responsibilities of a manager are, again, that all boils down to what's your contract say between you and the property manager? What does it say that they will and won't do? Some property managers don't want to manage your contractors because they don't know whether your contractors can do the job right, have proper insurance and licensing, are going to show up on time, blah, 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 blah. If it's your contractor, then the property manager may not want to have to do all of the work of coordinating with them. Or they may charge you an hourly fee to be there alongside the vendor while the vendor's there working or something like that. Again, that's one of those situations that it's really up to the contract as to what is and is not included and what the charges would be.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I my dad has a business partner, and he just purchased a property out in Rochester. And for those that don't know, Rochester is probably about,
About
I
an
don't
hour
know,
and
an
a half.
hour 20, hour
Yeah.
25. Yeah, right to the city, about that. They purchased a duplex out there, and um, he's doing all the management to start. But I know that for a fact he's looking to eventually scale a little bit more. So I could see and grow the business, or grow his passive income with the properties. So I could see him for sure. Now, he did all of the original initial work. This was like a foreclosure duplex kind of issue, and there's a lot of things that needed to be done there. He did all the initial work, but he was talking to me, I think it was about a month ago, and he was like, "Yeah, like I think for now, like the hour 20 drive while I'm doing, my professional work here, like that's okay. But as I start to buy a little bit more, and it gets more out of reach," and he was looking into just a company to manage and help him kind of do that.
Right.
But makes sense.
Yeah.
It's as you
Actually,
grow.
when I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, City of Buffalo has rental registration requirements. So like we have to register as a property manager. We also have to register all of the properties that we are managing via the rental registration in the City of Buffalo. And essentially, if you have a non-owner occupied property that's being leased out, the city requires you to inform them who your property manager is. And if you live, I don't think you have to live in the city. I think you have to live in Western New York. And if you don't live in Western New York, they make you indicate who your local representative is, typically a property manager. I think a lot of people probably use a friend or a family member or something like that if they don't have a property manager. But they actually require you to say, hey, we have a local responsible person who can step in the event that we're not here, which is probably a good idea. But where it falls short is the fact that no one really seems to have access to that database. So, for instance, if Buffalo PD responded to a property and needed to get a hold of the landlord for some reason because there was property damage as a result of an accident or something like that, like they don't have access to that database to be able to get the information to make the phone calls. And It
Yeah.
seems like more of a money grab in the city of Buffalo, but if it was executed properly, I think that it could actually be truly beneficial. It's just the way it
Yeah, I
goes.
mean, it feels like an emergency contact essentially
Yeah,
for your property, and it makes
right,
sense. It makes sense, and as far as just like protecting also the renter, I mean, the renter's out, say they're an hour and a half in Rochester, it's the middle of the winter, something
mhm,
happens, like, yeah, like, I mean, I know the renter knows that maybe their landlord's not from the area, but still, like,
right,
I get it. Like an emergency contact, you need a representative within that zip code or not even the zip code, but that area.
right.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and it's that's something that it does make sense as long as it's executed correctly. Like, as
Right.
long as it's not just a $40 a year money grab for each property, which I think that's what the going rate is in Buffalo.
That
Um,
makes sense. Yeah.
but yeah, it is what it is. I think it's a good idea. I wish that more municipalities were on board with doing something like that, but only in a way that it physically makes sense. Like it, I'm sick of money grabs. Like if you're gonna do something, but make the data accessible so that the people who need it can get to it.
Right. No, I agree. All right. Let's do another form submission here. We'll go right into Gloria's question. Gloria asks, I need to ask my tenants to help share the cost for water, sewer, and garbage. Suggestions, please. I'm
So there's not a
guessing
ton
Gloria's midway through, probably already
getting
started
midway
the
through a
lease here, and
lease.
I'm
That's kind of what
guessing
I'm thinking. Yeah.
yeah, wasn't included in there originally.
Yeah. So if you're already in a lease, changing the terms of the lease are going to be challenging. Depending on how your lease is written, you may be able to make changes to the lease given, a certain time frame. For instance, our lease, I think, allows us to make changes given a 60 or 90-day time frame. But the flip side to that is if we want to make a change to the lease in the middle of the term, the tenant also has the ability to say, I don't agree to these new terms. I'm going to move. So I would say that depending on how her lease is written, she may not even have the ability to try to make these changes until the end of the lease term. At that point, it's something that I would say to the tenants, hey, we're not going to bump your rent up this year, but we do expect that you guys are now going to be responsible for water, sewer, garbage, or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, and make it part of the discussion when it comes time for lease renewal at that point. But if
Yeah.
you're in the middle of a lease term and you don't have any language in your lease that allows you to make changes, then I would think that at that point you're probably going to wind up waiting until the next lease term.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I don't know if I've ever. I think I've had 4 or 5 leases. I don't know if I've ever paid for water, sewer, or garbage,
Mhm.
but I have heard of people that do have it in their lease, and
Did
I
you
get
ever
it
rent
for
a
sure.
single family though?
Yeah, I had
Yeah.
two, I had 2 single families,
Mhm.
and then I think 3 multis.
So a
So
lot of times with singles, especially here in Buffalo, if a water bill goes unpaid, it turns into a lien against the property and the
yeah,
property can literally be foreclosed on. Like there was a news story a couple years back because there were some people that were literally going to foreclosure over like
yeah,
$1,000 worth of water bills. It was crazy. So
yeah,
a lot of times landlords will choose to leave the water bill in their name and leave the billing coming to excuse me, coming to them, and then they'll either rebill it to the tenant or they just include it as part of the rent.
yeah.
But the reason they do that is so that it doesn't wind up going unpaid and doesn't turn into a lien against the property.
Right. No, that makes sense. That actually
And actually,
funny you brought that up.
we have another question here from Emily. Any loopholes for landlords stuck with the city, whichever town delinquent or
Yeah.
unpaid utility bills for water, sewer, et cetera, that the tenant did not pay? This is why you got to make sure you get those finalized bills at the end of the lease term before you finalize the security deposit. We've had situations like this where, like, if there's a water leak, we've had like a one-time adjustment type of a situation. But I think Emily's probably going to be in a rough spot because it's just an unpaid
Yeah.
bill. It doesn't sound like there was actually a leak or anything. It sounds like it was more just the tenant got one over on her, unfortunately. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's one of those situations where we really try to monitor the utility situation, especially on water, as closely as we can for that exact reason.
Yeah, it's funny that we brought this up. I just in my area where I live in Buffalo, we just had I just received my water bill, and I had logged on, checked the portal, looked at how much the portal had said. I looked at my paper copy, and the bills were completely different, not even close. And the billing
Yeah.
dates were kind of messed up and all that. But luckily, like this is my prompt or my shout out to anybody to join any sort of Facebook group of your local where you live.
Hmm.
Any of those Facebook groups, immediately I went right to the page, and they had already issued a statement about the town of blah blah blah. They issued, half of 50% of the water bills that went out were incorrect. Like, don't panic. Like, you don't owe money on.
Right.
It had a date for the previous billing, and I was like, oh crap! Like, did I not pay this? Like, that's not good. Like,
Yeah.
so always one, yeah, double check if you have a portal, cross-reference your paper copy that you get if you don't have paperless with
Hmm.
your portal, but also join as many, and we have RentPrep for landlords is a good
Sure.
Facebook group for us, but join as many local area groups that you can,
And
because
not
as soon
not
as
just
there's an
landlord
issue,
groups, like just general
yeah,
community
just
groups.
regular groups,
Yeah.
just town groups, whatever. As soon as there's an issue, I guarantee you're not the first person to notice it. And somebody
Mhm.
will bring it up, and you will feel 100 times better.
So we had that earthquake earlier this year, I think it was. So we
Yes.
had
Yeah,
the
it was in the
earthquake, and
summer.
that was like right near my house. The epicenter of that was not far from my place. So like all of the Facebook groups for all like the local town were like, did everybody else feel that? And blah 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 blah. It
Mhm.
was everywhere. But yeah, you find out a lot of information out of those groups. You really do. More than just, it's more than just banter and garbage. There's occasionally some tidbits that fall out of there that are actually worthwhile.
Yeah, I know I'm in two different ones for my town.
Mhm.
But it is crazy how fast word can travel, and sometimes it's completely accurate and sometimes it's not.
It's
But
completely
it is
inaccurate.
a game of telephone, but it is nice to have some insight from people that are living around you, as far as, somebody might have seen what had happened, or,
Mhm.
somebody issue with the water billing, which made me feel a lot better. So,
Yeah, definitely.
yeah, use your resources, people.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's jump back to a Facebook question. Uh, let's do this question from Dan. Hi, what is the max amount of time you will hold a house for a tenant with deposit before starting the lease period?
Um,
Hold a house for a tenant with deposit before
2
starting
weeks.
the lease period.
Let me think through this. So, once an applicant is approved, they have 5 days to pay us their deposit, their full security deposit, and to sign their lease. And then we typically expect them to move in within a couple weeks thereafter. I think we've probably done a few that are longer than that. As a matter of fact, I can remember we had somebody that had like a perfect application, like drop dead perfect application. They scored a perfect score on our matrix. But they were moving from out of state to take a job, take a promotion, but they weren't coming in until like the beginning of the next month. And I emailed that property owner and said, this is the best application that I've seen all year. I think it's worth it if we extend our window on this one. And he agreed.
Mhm.
And it worked out well. So,
Yeah,
but typically I would say like no longer than 2 weeks. And if I don't have first of all, I don't hold the apartment at all until I have your deposit and I have your lease signed. I'm not holding anything. And then I'll hold it until your move in date, which it should be within 2 weeks.
yeah. No, that makes sense.
And we tell our applicants that too. We actually tell them, when they're approved, we tell them your application is approved, but the apartment is not guaranteed to you until you get your lease signed and until you pay your deposit in full. And that
Yeah.
kind of helps to nudge them along a little bit too to get the job done.
Yeah, no, that that makes sense. All right. Let's go. What do we got? We got 15 minutes left. Let's go to let's do a form submission question. Question from Jill. Though the lease prohibits smoking, the tenant smokes in the unit. I've just reminded her that there's no smoking. What are my recourses? I'm in Massachusetts.
So I don't know what the laws are in Massachusetts. We'll go by what I can do here in New York. I would issue a notice to cure, and basically tell them, we've found that you're smoking in the apartment. We can smell it, we can see it, blah, 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 blah. It's easier if you can like see evidence of it. If you see an ashtray with a bunch of burnt cigarettes in it, that's a lot easier to
Yeah.
take a picture of and convey. We know that you're smoking in your apartment versus I walked in and I smelled cigarette smoke. Well,
Mhm.
that might mean that somebody smoked a cigarette and walked back inside after. Generally, we know the difference between someone is smoking in this apartment versus someone just walked through here after having a smoke. But having, proof, physical proof, always makes it a lot easier to enforce a no smoking clause and essentially tell the tenant. And what we do is we'll send them like their violation letter with a picture of the ashtray. Then there's no question as to
Yeah.
like, we know you were smoking in the apartment. Here's a copy of your nasty ashtray. Um, that's
No,
probably
that,
the best route to go. And if they continue to smoke at that point, I would say you may have to look into either non-renewal of their lease or evicting them for non-compliance.
yeah. Is that just a good general rule of thumb? Photos, if
Yeah.
possible, get photos, and then there can't be any, banter back and forth of, he said, she said, or
Mhm.
this or that. Like, here's the evidence, here's the
Yeah.
photo. Like, try to get
Well, and
another piece of the property in the photo that
sure.
identifies that it's there,
Yeah, exactly. We like that Z Inspector software that I mentioned because it takes time date stamped photos and also records GPS coordinates from where you were
Oh,
standing when you took
wow.
the photo,
That's
which is
cool.
really nice. It's
Yeah.
super nice, especially for like process service. You can literally generate a PDF report showing, no, I was physically there. Here's the GPS coordinates from my phone, and here's the picture that I took when I was standing on the porch. It gets the point across really, really easily. There are
Yeah.
apps though. I have an app on my phone. Android does not have date time stamping built into their native camera app for some reason. I use a program called Auto Stamper, which is, I think, 99 cents in the App Store. And that works really, really well for putting time date stamps on your photos as you're taking them so that you have that data recorded on there.
Yeah. That is really nice. Have you ever had anybody try to argue if you've used those apps, try to argue that that wasn't the case and you just
Oh, that we
never
like
won?
Photoshopped it or whatever.
Yeah, like, oh yeah,
Never,
there's no
never
way
had
that
somebody
that's
argue
true.
that. I've had somebody, we had somebody try to argue that the stove wasn't clean when they moved in. So I
Oh,
literally showed them the move-in photos on the date that they moved in, and I showed them the move-out photos the day that I was there and looked at the stove, and they completely dropped their issue at that point. So
yeah.
more often than not, when presented with irrefutable evidence, most people are not going to continue to refute the evidence.
Does that
Uh,
make the does that make the tenant sign off that are you able to share the library of before photos with them and make
we
the
can.
tenant sign off on those? And
Yeah.
then when you back, like I'm thinking of even, and I don't know the software, but like you share a common photo library of the before photos. At the end of
Mhm.
them, they sign it. At the end, if it doesn't match up, how can they argue that?
So we're a little behind the times even with the program that we're using. We're not using all the features that it has. We still do a in-person physical condition inspection report when a tenant moves in, and we have them sign off on that, which also notes any damages in the apartment and things of that nature. We can do that from the app. We're just not doing it currently. It would work very similar to um, like if you're at a craft show or something and somebody hands you their thing to sign on their cell phone, same concept. um so that's an option. That's probably, yeah, that's probably the best option
Wow.
actually.
Yeah. No, I think that's cool. I mean, I feel like that stuff has come a very long way. I mean, when I was in college and stuff, it was all like, paper copies of this, that, check boxes, checklists, which is
Mhm.
all good. It's
Yeah.
just I think that the digital stuff has kind of It's kind of been cool, like you said, like being able to take a photo, have the GPS coordinates, the time of the photo, like that's,
Mhm.
it's valuable to a landlord and also from a tenant perspective too, just
Yeah.
because I feel like, and is there a tenant can access it as well?
I think we have to send them a copy of the report, but once they have a copy
Yeah,
of the report, they can from there download any of the photos
there
individually,
you go.
or they can download a zip file containing all the photos or whatever they want to do.
Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
that's cool from a tenant perspective too, just
yeah,
because the truth is there.
right. There's no refuting it once you have that, and if they, especially if they've signed off on it, that makes it, that makes it so much easier at that point.
Yeah.
The Section 8 reports are like that. So they use a lot of the Section 8 agencies are using a software called Happy, Happy, to do their property inspections and stuff like that. They definitely use the built-in signature features. So like if a tenant is present at the time of the inspection, they have the tenant sign with their finger. They've had us sign with our finger if we have a management representative there. Works really, really well because then there's no question. Like when you sign saying, I understand everything that the inspector told me, it makes it a
Yeah,
lot clearer. So,
no, for sure. Okay, I think we got time for one or two more here.
okay.
Let's go down to a Facebook question from Paula. I need to give my wonderful tenants notice. They have been in there almost 10 years and have treated the house very well. I need to go in and do renovations. What is a good way to break it to them? I am in Oregon down on the coast. Is she giving them notice of just them her doing renovations, or is she giving
It
notice
sounds like they
that they
have to
need to
move.
leave the property? Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like she's in a position where they're going to need to leave the property.
Wow.
Been there almost 10 years, treated the house very well, need to go in and do renovations. What's a good way to break it to them? I'm in Oregon down on the coast. So I don't know what the rules are in Oregon as far as what you have to do for breaking a lease or ending a tenancy or whatever. Paula, you're on your own to do your research on that. As far as giving notice would go, though, like this is a situation where, especially if they've been there for 10 years, this is a phone call. This is not a phone call. This is an in person visit to them to say, hey, I want to make you guys aware that your life is about to be disrupted.
Hmm.
Because it is. You're disrupting the past decade of this family's life at the end of the day.
Yeah.
It should be in person if at all possible. If you're a distance landlord, it needs to be a phone call. This needs to be
Right.
more than a letter. Hey, move, get
Yeah.
out.
And there
Like it
there
needs
needs
to
to
be
be
more than that.
yeah,
And
definitely
that's
adequate time
that's
too
one of
on
the
your
things that a lot of landlords tend to forget is that this is the property is only one part of the business. This is very much a people business at the end of the day. The property's only one part of it. It's an important part. It's a critical part, but it's the people are just as critical because if they're not there,
mhm.
you're not generating the revenue that you need to pay the mortgage.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, like these people have been paying your mortgage for 10 years. The respect that they deserve is more than a phone call. It's a visit, they're going to be upset. Like there's no way around it. If you lived in a home for a decade and somebody showed up one day and said, you have to move in 3 months' time, you would be upset. They're going to be upset. There's no way around it.
Yeah.
But the right thing, the responsible thing to do as a landlord in that situation is to physically visit the property and have a conversation with those tenants, in my opinion. If you live
Yeah.
out of the area, um, Zoom call if it's possible. Phone call is a last resort kind of a thing. But if it just sending a letter would be that's a
Mhm.
Blackstone type of thing to do. That's a very corporate landlord thing to do. Would be to just send a
Yeah.
letter and say, "Hey, you're on your own."
I mean, think about that. 10 years of a quality, 10 years of what appears to be a quality tenant since they're not gone.
Yeah,
Um, Definitely give them adequate time to figure out what they need to do. Maybe
hmm,
even, and this might be overstepping, but maybe even if you have some other property managers or landlords in the area that you
sure,
know and you network with, tell them, here's the situation. I've got this great family that's been living here for
right.
10 years and a referral for them. That's anything that you can do to help somebody that's given that much to you as well.
Well, and I have seen that happen. Like there's a couple of landlords here in Western New York that I've seen pop up on different Facebook groups and say, "Hey, I have a great tenant that they have to move out because we're going to renovate, or there was a house fire or whatever. Does anybody have something for this tenant? I want to see them go to the next place, whatever the case may be." And
Yeah.
it's landlords know when they have a good tenant. Like obviously the first choice would be, if you have another property that you can move them to, keep them. If you don't, it's always nice to know that they are going to another place where they're not going to get screwed by the next landlord. And if you have that network and you can kind of help, it's a little bit of a reach, but I don't think
Yeah.
it's out of the question.
No, for sure. All right. What do we got? 4 minutes. I
We
want
can
to
squeeze one more in.
share. Yeah, I want to share. I actually uncovered the photo. I uncovered the photo of the RentPrep office. Can you see
Oh,
the?
yep, I can.
can-
Let me add it.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Isn't that why? I mean, it's not the best quality photo, but that
Yeah,
is
but you can
that's
see,
pretty
like,
high.
that's ridiculous. Like that's
Yeah.
yeah.
That's that
Um
was I don't think we were in office that day. I think Steve was just driving by and was like, let
well,
me just check and see how it's doing.
that's less snow than I had at my house. So like
Yeah.
looking at those drifts and stuff, it looks like you probably had about 3 foot in the parking lot. We had
Yeah.
3, 4 foot like in our driveway on the one end, and then on the other end it was more like 7 foot where it had all drifted.
Yeah.
It was not fun.
No, no, it was
Winter
not.
is one of the most stressful times in property management, and I think that the staff here can attest to that fact, because they've watched us getting snowplow contracts and stuff in place. And like snow, so I can't stand snow. I've never really been a huge winter fan to start with, but when you work in property management and every time it snows you have to worry about slip and fall hazards, and did everything get plowed, did everything get shoveled, are we ready for the day before the day even starts, kind of a thing. It's a lot. So I
Yeah.
I hats off to everybody that owns property that has to deal with these winter situations for other people, because it's
Mhm.
a challenge to say the least.
I know I was ice skating in I mean last year, yeah, the parking lots were frozen over and I had my pair of skates and I my hockey skates and I was skating through the parking lots. It was wild. And then I think the snow all melted the next week. And then it was
Yeah.
like like sunny out. But
I mean, that's how
um
it was when we had that blizzard a couple years back, the bigger blizzard, October storm knife or whatever they called it. That was another one that dropped like 7 foot of snow. And like 3 days later, it was all gone because the temperatures jumped up into the 50s, might have even been in the low 60s. And then we had to deal with flooding because all of the sewer systems had backed up. All the storm sewers had
and
backed
that's
up.
what can happen too. And then yeah, and the reverse side of that is you get that warm weather, everything melts, and then you get that cold drop at night or anything like that, and you end up with ice all over the place, and it's just crazy. But
Absolutely. It's a lot.
all right,
Winter's a lot to worry about. If you live in a warm weather climate, consider yourself lucky, because snow is not fun to deal with on a regular basis.
no, but all right, I'm gonna cap it there, Andrew.
Yeah, it's a good call.
I think we answered a lot of questions. We had some good winter discussion. I do want to make a note that if you follow us on social media, it would just be RentPrep on Facebook, Instagram, or hashtag RentPrep or at RentPrep on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We do have. I know that as far as social media posts go for the next month, we are starting to pepper in our winter checklist stuff, everything for the colder weather for all of you East Coast and Central goers. So that stuff will all be out. I know that as far as Andrew, is there any for podcasts? What topics do we have coming up? Do we?
I don't have the list in front of me at the moment. I know that this week's podcast is actually going to be the audio from this AMA. And then the next podcast that comes out, I'm not sure. I haven't had a chance to look at that yet. I think we have a prepping for winter tips video that's coming out in the next
So
couple weeks.
yeah, so that'll be good, and um, I think I'm excited for winter. You're not
I'm
as
not.
excited. I kind of like the
You're a
change. I've
cold
already got
weather.
my tree up.
You play hockey. We have a tree up. We put the tree up. You go out and play hockey and stuff like that though. Like I hibernate all winter long. Like as soon as the temperature drops below 50, I'm cold and I'm not warm again until spring hits. So yeah, you are much more of a winter guy than I am.
I for sure am. I ski too, so I get into all that,
All of
and
it.
it's
Yeah,
a good change for me. I get too hot in the summer,
I get it.
but
Well, let's go ahead and wrap things up here. Josh, thank you so much for joining me today. We're going to be back in December with a December AMA. That'll probably be just before we jump into the holiday season. And actually, I think now that I'm thinking about it, there's a video coming out on prepping for the next year as well. So that'll be coming up before the end of the year. That's pretty much it for me. Josh, anything?
no, I hope everybody had a nice Thanksgiving, and like we said, we got the holiday season coming up, so we'll be back. We'll be back in December, and we
Right.
should know the date on that. I think we're gonna pick a date this week. We should
I
have a
think so.
date. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay.
we'll get our date picked for that and we'll get that one posted. Apologies to everybody who had tuned in last week. Unfortunately, we were not able to pull last week's live session off, but I'm glad that we got to do this week's live session. We were able to do our AMA for the month of November. Thank you all so much for
Just
watching. We'll
happy.
see
We're happy
you.
you're safe, Andrew.
I'm happy
We're
I'm
happy
safe.
you're okay.
We'll see everybody next month.